for being able to make it to this first Women in STEM speaker series. And the biggest thanks is to Remy, who helped prepare it for a long time and also be flexible with all the changes. So without further ado, I'm gonna do the introduction and we'll get it rolling. So good afternoon and welcome to the Women's Maker Program Speaker Series. I'm Fanny, the educational technologist at the University of Virginia Library, along with Jennifer, Maggie, and also Jeremy, part of the team overseeing the Spring 2020 Women's Maker Program. This is the inaugural year for the program, which aims to support first and second year students in pursuit of STEM careers. The 6 fellows in the program are getting experience with a variety of the tools in our makerspace, and will be seeking to solve a community-based problem through a self-identified project. In addition to the tangible result of practical experience, we hope that the program increases their interest in makerspace technologies and start to build a community of women in this space. The program, including today's event, is supported by the University of Virginia Library and generously funded through the Charles Brown Endowment. The library is also seeking to more broadly increase diversity in our spaces through the Inclusive Maker Group. This group focuses on making culture, connecting to mentors and peers, and working creatively and on the projects for our community. The Inclusive Maker Group provides the opportunity to meet, collaborate, and connect with others that share experiences as students, scholars, and makers. If you are interested in joining the Inclusive Maker Group, please contact Maggie Nally, and her email address I will be included as a note for this recording. I'm now delighted to introduce the first speaker in a series in which we will hear women in academia and industry about their journey in STEM. So Remy Pangle is the director of the Office for the Advancement of Sustainable Energy at JMU. Mrs. Pangle has over 10 years of experience in the wind industry and has led the Wind for Schools program in Virginia since 2010. In her current role as the director of OASC/JMU, Mrs. Pangle works mainly with educators and school administrators to bring meaningful renewable energy education into the classroom. Remy also has an interest in offshore wind seeding and other sources of ocean renewable energy. Mrs. Pangle earned her Bachelor of Science in Integrated Science and Technology with emphasis on environmental science from James Madison University, and her Master's of Science in Oceanography from the University of Maine. Mrs. Pangle was the 2011 recipient of the REpowering America Outstanding Young Advocate Award and the 2013 recipient of the JMU Women of Distinction Award, among other accolades. Okay, so now we will warmly welcome Remy to give us the talk. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Let me just share my desktop here. Here we go. And that, you guys can all see that now?
Yes. Yeah, you can type in the chat. I will monitor that. And if you have any trouble, let me know. I will be able to reply back.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am sorry that we're not able to meet in person, but I'm happy to be here virtually. And it's really nice to meet the fellows and talk about how I got here. I have kind of a little bit of a convoluted story of how I got into the renewable energy industry. It makes sense when you think about it, but I guess at first glance it doesn't necessarily seem super logical. But basically, most of my career has been spent dealing with climate. So climate change, climate issues, things like that. But I really started early on dealing with what I call problems. I don't know if you would call it problems, but I did a lot of research into understanding the impact of climate change. And then towards the end of, more recently have been starting to look at possible solutions, which is kind of a little bit more of a fun way to look at climate, is focusing on solutions rather than problems. I know I made a little note here that I don't know if you guys will see. Is this going to be, this is being recorded, right? And so the folks at National Renewable Energy Labs would like to know if we can share it with them at the end. So maybe Feng, if you can let me know at some point. But basically, I did not grow up in Virginia. I'm a Yankee. I grew up in Massachusetts. And I really do feel that growing up on the coast of Massachusetts really did influence my interests. So I started out in Marblehead, Massachusetts, which is a little coastal Massachusetts town with lots of sailing. And then in middle school, I moved to Ipswich, Massachusetts, which is also a coastal town, but it's more on the marshes and there's lots of rivers. It's a little bit different environment, but both small town New England. But I think being around the ocean and playing near the rivers, and I went to summer camp on an island. I mean, all of these things I think just really got me thinking about particularly science. And I think that's really where my interest grew. I also was diagnosed when I was born with a metabolic disorder that made it so I couldn't eat certain things. And growing up is a little challenging when you can't eat the same foods that everybody else has. But it also really pushed me to think more about being a scientist so I could cure my own disease kind of thing. And it gave me a lot of opportunities to practice science in a lab as I was growing up, which I really was my dream, I think, was to be in a lab. But I didn't really know after high school. I knew I liked science and I really wanted to study science. And I really had this vision that I was going to work in a lab someday and wear the lab coat and the lab glasses. And but I just didn't really know what field of science I was interested in. And so I don't know, when you guys went to college, if you had that clear vision, good for you, but I don't think many of us are in that boat, right? You go to college and your first year, you might be in a major, you might not even have a major, and then that may change very quickly. For me, it was even earlier than that. I applied to, I mean, Lord knows how many colleges, right? You apply to like 6 or 7 colleges. And I think on every application I applied to a different major. But like one school was chemical engineering, one school was science education. And at one point I was accepted and had like ready to go, had a dorm assigned to me at the University in New Hampshire to study marine biology. But in the end, I was waitlisted at James Madison University, but they called me up. Gosh, it probably was like July. I mean, it was really late. They called me up and they accepted me off the waiting list into this program that was pretty new. It was the second year of it, and it was called Integrated Science and Technology. And they needed girls in the program, to be frank. I'm pretty sure that the only reason I got into JMU is because I was a girl. But the program was perfect. And I don't know how many of you know about the ISAT program at JMU, but basically for the first couple of years, your freshman, your sophomore year, you're introduced to like 6 different fields of science. And so you kind of have a little survey of different science programs. And then in your third year, you pick 3 sectors to focus on. And then in your senior year, you have to pick 1 sector to be your concentration, and you do a capstone project, which basically meant that I had like 4 years to figure out what I wanted to do in science. So to me, that was a fantastic opportunity. So I ended up in the ISAT program. And for me, this was, I think, the game changer. Integrated science and technology is a very, it was cutting edge pedagogy at that time. I took a class where I learned physics and calculus in the same room, in the same class, all at the same time. And I took physics and calculus in high school, but when I took them mashed together in one classroom, it was like a light bulb just like went off. And so integration, and there's a huge focus on collaboration. So lots of collaborative projects, and just lots of opportunities to do things that I don't think I would have had opportunities to do at other schools. So I was very, very lucky that this program needed girls, because other than that, I don't think I would have gotten in. But after 4 years in the program, I started seeing myself drifting to environmental science. And so a little bit less and less that lab environment that I thought I wanted to be in. But in senior year, it came to that point where it's like, you know, you got to get a job or you go to grad school. And when I couldn't get any job offers, I applied to a couple of graduate schools, and I got accepted to the University of Maine. And so the interesting story behind the University of Maine is I didn't get accepted, so I wanted to study geography. And with that, they didn't understand what the integrated science and technology program was. So I ended up having to take some biology classes and chemistry classes to supplement. And then you have to take the GSATs, right? So they're like the SATs, but for grad school. And I don't know if they're the same as they were back then, but they had math and English, just like the SATs, but then they had this logic section. And in that logic section, I blew it out of the water. I mean, I didn't know, I knew all this stuff, but you know, it just made sense to me. And I got a call from a faculty member at the University of Maine who was like, you know, I've never had a grad student before, but I have this project and I really need somebody who can do computer programming. And I was like, well, I only took like one introductory class in college, but he said, with the logic scores on your GSATs, I know I can teach you to program because it's just logic. So I slowly disintegrated my career in a lab and started moving to a career in front of a computer, which was definitely not what I wanted to do. But when a school tells you they're going to give you a master's degree and pay you to take those classes, it's hard to say no, right? So I ended up in the University of Maine in the School of Marine Sciences, and I got my master's in oceanography, and I was studying marine remote sensing, which this image on the page is an example of the kind of work that I was doing. So satellites fly over all the oceans, and they take pictures, and they're sensing various things. And in this picture, they're sensing chlorophyll, which indicates to us where there's phytoplankton or plant life at the surface of the ocean. So they can only see the surface, or as far as light can go into the ocean, which isn't very far depending on various things. But I looked at 365 times 10. So over 3,000 images that look just like this, 10 years worth of data, in order to figure out if I could come up with some sort of theory as to how harmful algal blooms happen in the southern part of the Gulf of Maine. And so those algae that are harmful to shellfish originate in the Bay of Fundy. And so how do they get down there, and how can we predict when we need to close a shell fishery before the shell fishery is destroyed by a harmful bloom? So it was kind of cool, and I was really feeling like coastal zone management and real application. But it didn't, you know, a job in industry didn't really happen for me. So I ended up getting another position at another university in Florida, the University of South Florida, where I continued to do marine remote sensing. this time really focusing on phytoplankton again, but now phytoplankton that goes to the bottom of the ocean. Hold on just a second. What do you need, babe? Oh yeah, you can eat that. Oh, it's for me? Aren't you, sweetheart?
I do a carry on the back and the front.
Okay, thank you, babe. Love you. Sorry, that was my daughter. Okay, bye. Go watch. Okay. Here. Here. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh. Jill. Sorry, now my dog is attacking me. Okay. The lovely egg. Oh, you're trying to eat the chocolate. So I'm so sorry. Yes, everybody's laughing. So a lot of my research has been focused on phytoplankton, which really does play a really large role in climate regulation and climate change. It can take that carbon out of the air that we're worried about as a sink for carbon. But the question that we were trying to answer is, does it just get re-respirated into the air by like a fish eating that phytoplankton? Or can we get down to this point, what percentage of the phytoplankton made at the surface is then actually stored and taken out of the system and stored in these deep ocean sediments? So again, spending my life in front of the computer was not in the cards, or was not in my plan, but ended up being what my skill sets gravitated me towards. So after a while at the University of South Florida, we had a school district locally that had contacted our office for marine remote sensing and said, hey, we would love for you to teach teachers about marine remote sensing and what you're doing and how you use geographic information systems. So we developed some teacher training programs, and I got interested and started participating in these. And this is, I think, where my education kind of came from, where my love for sharing science information with others came from. Do you guys remember maybe when you were in middle school or something, did they have like job shadow day or like go to school with your parent day? Did they do that? Do you guys remember those? My mom was a flight attendant and my dad was a self-employed carpenter that didn't live with us. So on the days when you got to go to school with your parents, anyone who didn't have a parent to go to work with went to the elementary school and was a teacher's aide for the day. So back very early on, I thought I would be a teacher. And now full circle, going through all these science classes, getting thrown behind a computer, I ended up back at this point where I really got into the idea of communicating science to the public. So informal science education, working with museums, and not just working with teachers in classrooms, but informal science, I think, is just so important. I would see this amazing work we were doing at the University of Florida, and the faculty members were like scared to talk to journalists. It's like they're making amazing discoveries about something amazing in the ocean and nobody knows about it. They just write into this other scientific journal and talk to other scientists about it. But the people who need to know and to use it to make amazing decisions and policy, we're not getting to know that. So we did a lot of lobbying on the Hill with our students. And we worked with teachers and worked with museums and worked with the newspapers to try to get that information out there. And I was hooked. However, living in Florida in the early 2000s, I got hit by like 6 hurricanes. And I pretty much said, this is it. I can't live in Florida anymore. Plus, realistically, if you look at oceanography and the things that we study, man, it can be a depressing career. We're talking about sea level rise issues. You're talking about ocean acidification, coral bleaching, overfishing. I mean, plastic islands in the middle. You know, every day is just like one more horrible thing happening to our oceans. And so when I was offered a position in Virginia, a little further away from all of those hurricanes. It was also an opportunity to transfer from working on the problems and looking at all those problems related to climate change and start working on solutions. So I called a professor from JMU that I had worked with back in the day and said, hey, I need to get out of Florida. Virginia seems nice. You got anything you need help with from a marine scientist? And at that point, they just happened to be starting the Virginia Coastal Energy Research Consortium, which was a consortium of universities, Virginia Tech, JMU, George Mason, ODU, Norfolk State, and they were all working together to come up with ocean-related energy options. Offshore wind was the big thing, and then Old Dominion was also looking at using algae to make biodiesel. But JMU was slated to do what we call marine spatial planning, which is basically using geographic information systems to look at the space offshore Virginia and try to figure out where would it make sense to put wind turbines. We've got lots of things that go on offshore Virginia Beach. Any of you guys in Virginia Beach? No, y'all in Nova? Everybody's in Nova probably, or Charlottesville. But in Virginia Beach, you've got the military, you've got shipping, plus you've got recreation and tourism. So all of those things need to be considered before you can actually, and then obviously, is it windy enough? And then we have to look at the depth of the water, because technology at that time and still can't really go any deeper than 30 meters. So we have to make sure that we're not in too deep of waters. And all of this needed to be considered before we understood what part of the ocean would we even consider putting these wind turbines in. And so it took me a good 2 years to make this map. And it's a little fuzzy, doesn't maybe look super impressive, but it's a lot of data mining and a lot of talking to people, trying to get the correct data. And there's one big piece of the puzzle that I don't know if you guys maybe have thought about this before, but there's one big piece of the puzzle that's not in here and we still don't really have, which is the marine life. So this is all like, you know, legal limits, boundary layers, lease block areas, like I said, shipping lanes, military work zones, things like that. But the picture isn't full until we understand the sediments of the ocean and what lives in the ocean. So even though these red squares further into that grid offshore are really determined to be where we're going to build offshore wind farms, we also need to know what kind of environmental impacts we could have. And so this actually did lead to an offshore wind project that is actually being built as we speak. That will be built off of Virginia Beach in this, well, part of this area that we determined. So it was a really neat transition, looking at how we mitigate impacts of climate change rather than looking at the problems of climate change every day. And so once that project was done, our office at JMU won a grant to become one of the states to administer the Wind for Schools program, which is a Department of Energy funded program where universities work with K-12 schools to install wind turbines at their schools. So you guys are all Northern Virginia, is that right? No? Northern Virginia, we got one Northern Virginia. Are the rest of you in Charlottesville? 2, 3 Northern Virginia?
I actually Norfolk, which is right next to Virginia Beach.
Oh yeah, awesome. So we have wind turbines at a lot of schools in the Virginia Beach area. So not in Norfolk per se, but we are in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach. We have a couple in Richmond, a couple throughout the valley, and we only have like one in Northern Virginia, Northern Virginia, if you look at a map of where the wind is, not the best place for wind. It's either kind of Virginia Beach or in the mountains. Now Richmond has a whole nother, so a lot of times the turbines that get installed are more educational demonstration projects, and we think of them as a really big microscope, right? That really expensive microscope. That's something you're going to learn from, but it's not going to generate all the electricity for your school. But now with solar, we see more of that happening. But the Wind for Schools program has us working with those schools to not only install wind turbines and now solar panels, but also to help bring curriculum to the teachers and get the kids super excited about renewable energy. And so that is what I have been doing for the last 10 years, since the technical part of my job, I guess, is kind of ended with offshore. But we've come kind of full circle in a kind of a convoluted way to get to this place. Now I work with teachers and kids all over the state to give them hands-on experiential learning opportunities in wind and solar and energy conservation and efficiency, and now EVs and storage. It's all part and parcel. And we run competitions for the kids. We engage the high school and middle school kids in competition, and there's also a college level competition. I don't know if you know, but UVA was competing in a solar competition at the college level. I don't know what's happening now because of everything and schools being shut down. I know our college competitions are put on hiatus at the wind energy. Virginia Tech and JMU were competing in those. So it's just been kind of crazy, but we really do want to make sure that if a teacher is out there and wants to teach about renewable energy, that there are easy to access, free or relatively inexpensive resources for them to do it, and opportunities to be trained if you're a teacher or an educator. So,
Remy, sorry,
long story.
I think Easy, you have a question, right?
Oh yeah, I had a question regarding Virginia and like the wind turbines. I was gonna ask, because you said like it was really difficult. I was gonna ask, was it because the wind is mostly blocked by like the Appalachian Mountains? Like, I was just wondering why.
Oh, no, that's a really good question. So it's challenging in Virginia, mainly because if you think the windiest spots are along the mountain ridges and along the coastline and offshore. So along the coastline in the Virginia Beach area, the biggest obstacle is that it's urban, right? We don't have a lot of space to put them at the large wind turbines in Virginia Beach. In the mountains of Virginia, we have lots of wind. It's definitely fit for a wind farm. The problem that we run into, well, there's a couple of problems. One of the main issues, you would think that we've got a lot of mountain ridges. Why wouldn't we see more of them? But most of our mountain ridges are taken up with Appalachian Trail or Blue Ridge Parkway or Skyline Drive, and all places where that it's not compatible to install a wind turbine. Now, the next ridge over, the other side of the valley, is more open, though there's a lot of state parks still, like George Washington and all of those different state parks where you have some limitations. But the key for wind development is you need a pocket of privately owned land. The other thing is that, we don't want a mountain that looks like this, because you can't put a wind turbine on an edge like that. You really want like a bald kind of stubby mountain. You don't want a mountain with a lot of trees on it because we don't want to deforest just to put up a wind turbine, right? So there's a lot of restriction. Well, there's a lot of things to consider. Just like that map of the ocean, we do similar activities on land. You have to have the ability to take that electricity and move it around. So it has to be near a transmission line or a substation. You want to be away from population centers because you don't want to be right on top of people when you're putting up your wind turbines. So there's lots of things to consider. And when you take all those things into consideration, there are pockets in Virginia. The reason we don't have any wind farms in Virginia is partially because of the difficulty in finding those pockets. We've got lots of people, developers that are in Virginia looking and scouting. There's a lot of aesthetic opposition. People don't want to see them. So I think education is one of our biggest obstacles. People don't know what they're saying no to or saying yes to, for that matter. So our office does work with communities that have the potential for a proposed wind farm, and we will work with them to understand what that means. How big are they really? Let's go to a wind farm and tour it. You can ask lots of questions, and, you know, overcoming a lot of the myths, I think, is another obstacle. So it's kind of that physical obstacle, but then there's that educational obstacle, I think. A good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for answering.
Yeah. So that's kind of my big journey. I just thought, you know, at this point, I would open it up to questions. But one of the big things is that if I was there in person, that I would have done one of these fun educational activities with you guys, maybe build a wind turbine or, you know, make some solar powered things. But since we're here virtually, I thought one of our main goals is for students to be well-educated citizens and able to be to make informed decisions about energy issues in the future. And so, like I was saying, that kind of education obstacle. And so I thought we could play a game of renewable energy trivia if you wanted to. But I'm also open to questions at this point as well.
Yeah, this game sounds fun. So maybe we can start with that and then see what other questions they have. And then maybe I'm also interested in learning about, you know, if you do it in person, what are some of the kits you use with the kids or, you know, with the participants, and how do you do this? So maybe we could incorporate in one of our Girl Scouts Maker Camp that we hope to, you know, do next fall.
Yeah, definitely. Well, trivia. So this is wind energy trivia. Does anybody want to answer? How big is a wind turbine? Kind of a loaded question.
Super big. I don't know. I know they're like really large.
Okay. Yeah, that is definitely true. Does anybody want to put some numbers towards what really large means to them?
You can put in the chat if you don't want to turn on the audio, or you can just, you know, turn on your audio.
I can't see the chat, so if someone can read them to me, if people are answering.
Yeah, I will be able to do that.
Oh no, I
250 feet tall, easy set.
250 feet. Oh, 10,000 feet. Wow, that's like 2 miles. That's crazy. That's awesome.
You know, the problem for me is I'm used to meter system, so I never could imagine what feet means.
Well, yeah. 3 or 4 stories tall. Those are good guesses. So, so the answer, I did find the chat, so thank you. So the answer is that technically all of those are right, except for maybe 10,000 feet at this point. That's maybe not, we're not there yet. But they do come in all different shapes and sizes. So I don't know, has anybody ever seen a wind turbine before? Like in person, not like online? Yeah, where did you see one?
I saw some when I was traveling to Florida. So like when I was coming down from like, you know, like Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. I honestly can't, because I was like really young, but I remember my dad like pointed it out to me so I could see them. But they're super big, but they were really far away because they were like in the mountains. So like I could only see them from a distance, but they were really cool to see.
Yeah, and so those are what we would call utility scale wind turbines. Yeah. Did somebody else want to say something? Sorry. Okay. So utility. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from Cleveland, and I think we have a wind turbine downtown near Lake Erie.
Whereabouts?
Near Lake Erie.
Okay, so yeah, that's very possible. Where are you at? Are you in
Cleveland, Ohio?
Cleveland. Okay, yeah, Ohio does have some wind farms, and New York does, depending on how close you are to the New York border. So there are a lot of wind turbines out in that area. And so all of the ones that you guys have probably seen are more of the kind of in the bottom right-hand side of my images up here. There would be the utility scale. They're 300 feet tall with 150-foot blades. The box on the top we call the nacelle is like the size of a school bus, to give you some scale. But there's also wind turbines like we have at JMU, which is the one, can you guys see my mouse? So that's the one at JMU, and that's 120 feet tall with 10-foot blades. And then, you know, these are what we call vertical access turbines, this one and this one, and those maybe stand 30 feet tall. Maybe this one's probably closer to like 10. So they range in size and shape. And they do that because they have a variety of different purposes. So you wouldn't take this big offshore wind turbine that's like 500 feet tall and stick it in your backyard to generate electricity. But you also wouldn't put this little dinky thing out in the ocean to generate electricity for hundreds of thousands of people either, right? So they all have different needs and different purposes. Okay, what's the difference between a windmill and a wind turbine? Is there a difference?
I guess we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of people use these terms independently, but the reality is that a windmill is like this thing that you saw in history class back in like Netherlands or on an old American farm, and they do work. They're going to do mechanical work. They're going to grind grain or pump water. As soon as you start generating electricity with the wind, we call that a wind turbine, because you're converting that kinetic energy into electrical energy. And those wind turbines look way different than those windmills because you're doing different types of work. So we could spend a whole semester talking about why that is. But for the most part, I think the key is that they're not the same. So when you see a wind turbine and you're driving down through Pennsylvania, Tennessee, that's a wind turbine. And if you're driving through the farmlands of Virginia, those are windmills. Oh, I like this question. What is the impact of a wind turbine on the environment?
I've heard a lot about it potentially killing birds, but I assume that's somewhat hyped up by people that oppose it. So,
yep, that's a really good point, and good for you to be aware of the possibility of that being kind of a taken out of proportion potentially. Anything else?
Do they have any negative effects on like the environment other than like disturbing, like if it's in a place where there's no forest, so like it wouldn't disturb a lot of habitats, I would assume, if it's like in a grassy plain? I mean, I don't know if it would provide any like bad effects. Obviously it would provide, you know, a large amount of energy for like a community.
Yeah, so I like that we're, you know, talking all about the positive and negative. So being able to provide electricity that's renewable and no carbon emissions, that's like the big thing, right? We're reducing our carbon emissions, and it actually doesn't use any water to generate electricity, which is not something a lot of people think about, but is a huge benefit to wind energy, but also thermal energy or solar energy as well. But on the negative side, what we hear the most about is that they're loud and they kill birds. And to be fair, you know, they do kill birds, but the question that we need to ask as scientists is, do they kill too many birds of a certain species, right, to be detrimental to their population? And so I'm not the expert on that. There's an organization called the American Wind Wildlife Institute that I highly recommend if you want to read up on where we're at with how wind turbines affect wildlife. That would be avian wildlife as well as anything living on the ground. Now, I've visited wind farms in West Virginia, and they have hunting clubs out there because the deer and the turkey are all out there. So they're not negatively impacting the ground species for that matter, but avian species are their own kind of thing. And then there's the bat issue, because bats are having, there was a big hit to the bat population with some diseases. And so the wind turbine issue just was exacerbated because of that. And then in terms of sound, a lot of people say that wind turbines are loud. I think that you need to make your own decision. So if you ever get the opportunity to visit a wind farm or stand right underneath a wind turbine, I would take it and form your own opinion on that. But statistically, at a certain distance that they're regulated to be away from houses, they usually are not much louder than about 50 decibels, which is like your house, what is it, during dinner? Is that what it says? Like, yeah, like, you know, like your house activity. So I could see where, you know, if it was like jet airplane, which is what a lot of people say it sounds like, that could be really disturbing. Okay. Let's see. We just talked about this. Does Virginia have enough wind to host a wind farm? And I hope every single one of you is going to shake your head yes now. Because now we know that not only do we have a ton of wind offshore, and that's where we're going to be putting some wind turbines in the ocean, but we also have patches of good wind along the coastline and throughout the mountains. And if you can find the right set of characteristics, it's no problem to build a wind farm. And we do have a proposed wind farm in Botetourt County that will hopefully also be starting construction this year. So that would be a land-based wind farm. And then we have the offshore wind farm as well. So exciting times. Okay. Any other wind questions before I get to solar trivia? You guys look ready.
I guess I have a question. Are there any like states or countries that you guys look to like as the leaders in wind energy?
That is a great question. Well, Europe is definitely the leader when it comes to offshore wind energy. That is where we get all of our advice and our lessons learned right now, because offshore wind is not a growing market. It's a very early market in Virginia and the United States. So we don't have the supply chain here to support it. So it's super important to rely on the Europeans for that. From a national standpoint, Texas has the most installed wind turbines. It's also a very large state, large windy state. So you can imagine they would have a lot of wind turbines. So they have the most wind energy capacity installed. However, California has more wind turbines installed, but California has super old wind turbines. So even though there's more of them, they don't have the same capacity as the larger new ones in Texas. And then Iowa has the most wind energy developed as a percentage of their energy consumption. So it's the highest percentage of their energy generation, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of like different statistics. So Iowa leads, California leads, Texas leads. Now Iowa, I think Virginia looks to Iowa as a lessons learned because there's a lot of similarities in the politics and the political situation in both states that we can learn from. California is California, right? They're like, you know, they probably don't have any better wind than Virginia does. And yet they've got the most wind turbines installed in the entire country because they're California. So I don't know that we can aspire to that. But that's a really good question. Okay, let's move on to solar trivia.
I also have two questions that I just
Oh, sure.
You know, I think one problem, if I remember correctly, with the wind energy is not as efficient. So I wonder if nowadays we have really improved the efficiency, or that's just the way it is. Another question is, so for solar, individuals can also try to do that at their home by installing the solar panels. But I wonder if, wind energy is that has to be done at a large scale, or individuals can also do something about it.
Yeah, those are two great questions. So the first one on the efficiency side. So wind turbines are as efficient as any other turbine, pretty much. So a coal plant, anything that uses a turbine to generate electricity, they're all around 30% efficient, including wind turbines. So they're all pretty much the same. The big issue with wind that people talk about is what we call intermittency, or a capacity factor. Like a coal plant will run nonstop, right? But we can't run a wind farm nonstop because the wind is the wind. And so it's going to be windy some days and not windy other days. And so that intermittency isn't something that, from an electricity standpoint, you could just hook that up to your house and know that you were going to have electricity all the time. So you would need a battery backup, or you would need, from a large utility scale standpoint, you need what we call base load. And that base load could be hydropower or nuclear power, or something that you can fire up whenever you need it. So that's one of the limitations of wind and solar at this point, until we develop large scale storage, which, if we can put large battery banks with wind turbines and solar panels, then there goes your need for a base load, because you can deal with your intermittency issues by storing energy in peak times. Your second question about wind turbines and their uses, a lot of times we are seeing them used, really big ones for utility scale, let's produce electricity for everybody kinds of purposes. But yeah, there's definitely a market, though it's diminishing because of solar, for putting a wind turbine at your home or at your business or on your farm to power just your stuff. And we call that distributed energy. So it's energy that you would get first, and then if you're generating more, it goes into the electric grid, and if you're generating less than you're using, then you can pull electricity from the grid. And so we don't see as much of that around Virginia, because the solar market is so cheap right now for residential use and businesses. But in other parts of the country where it's windier, then the distributed wind market did have a really good go, but solar really has outcompeted it right now, I think. So I don't think it's a lively market anymore. Awesome. These are really good questions.
I also have another question.
Sure.
For wind turbines, what kind of maintenance is required to keep it going? Like, after you set up the wind turbine, will it last for a long amount of time before someone has to repair it or do anything?
That's a really good question. The amount of maintenance, I think, depends on, I assume we're talking about the really big ones, right? Like wind farms. They need constant maintenance. You think of them like a really big, like a power plant, right? Or like your car. You do monthly maintenance on them. A lot of those really large wind turbines have a gearbox in them. And with that, there's oil that needs to be changed. And so there's environmental impact from the oil, right? And then you got to clean the blades, because any change to that airfoil shape will throw off the turbine. So there is some constant maintenance that needs to happen. The silver lining is that it provides jobs. And then I believe that if you're building a wind farm and you're looking for financing to finance this project, I think it's somewhere in that 2 to 3% of the cost of the wind farm should be estimated for maintenance costs. So it's not huge, but there is maintenance, but I think it's not any more than any other power plant. If anything, it's probably less. Good questions. The solar is a whole different story. Solar doesn't move. It's kind of easy to just throw up there and just leave it, unless you're in a desert and you need to like wash your solar panels every once in a while. Awesome. Okay, shall we move on to solar? Do you guys know lots about solar energy? So what are some ways that we use solar energy? And notice I said solar energy and not solar electricity. Any ideas? Okay, so solar panels. Yep, that's the key one, right? You know, we know we're going to use the sun to make electricity. What else? Yeah, there are different types of solar panels. That's good. Yeah. So greenhouses, yeah. So the idea of what we call passive solar heating, the ability to use the sun to make heat, which would be like a greenhouse, or in my house, I've got a whole lot of windows on the south side of my house. And so on a day like, well, it got sunny out. So on a day like today, it was only like, well, I guess it's like 70 degrees outside, but on a cold day, if it's super sunny, my house warms up faster just from having windows on the right side of the house, the correct side of the house. So we can heat with it. We can make electricity. We can heat our houses, or we can heat water. So there's this system on the top here is the solar hot water heater. Water is running through and getting heated up by the sun. And then the biggest thing that I love that a lot of people don't think about is that we use the sun to cook. And so if you can imagine places around the world that don't have ovens and microwaves and stoves and things like that, and they need to clean their water or they need to cook their food, they can use solar cookers. And like yesterday we tried it. It was a little too cloudy yesterday, but I have a solar oven, and we toast our s'mores in the solar oven, and it's super fun. So everybody should get a solar oven and cook little toasty marshmallows out in the sun. Good stuff with that. Okay, so the key is that we can do lots of things, of not just make electricity with the sun. All right, what are two important factors to consider when you go to install solar panels on your house? So you got a house and you're trying to decide, should I put solar panels on my house? Cost, yes, that's a big one. The amount of sun in your environment, that's right. So do I live in Greenland, or do I live in Costa Rica, or do I live in Virginia? And that has to do with the cost and your return on investment. Awesome. Any other ideas? What if I have, like my house is surrounded by trees? You think that would be a good idea? Yeah, cloud coverage really affect the sun contact. Okay, so yeah, cloud coverage, which would be a function of your climate, and goes into the amount of sun in your environment, but also shading from things like, I don't know if any of you live in a house that has dormers on it, or a chimney, anything on the roof that protrudes up, that could block the sun at a certain time of day. Also, what direction do you want your roof to face in?
Maybe you can ask the question.
I wanted to ask, because I know as far as like when people need to wear sunscreen, like even if there's cloud coverage, like parents will still warn you that like sun rays can still like get, because it's like UV rays. So I don't know if I didn't know if it was the same way regarding like sun panels, like even though if it's cloudy, they can still get rays from the sun or like energy from the sun. That's why I didn't know if it was really important regarding like if there was cloud coverage or not.
Yeah, I mean, on a bright sunny day with no clouds in the sky, you'll get way more solar power than if it's the same day, the same year, the same time, and there's clouds in front of you. You're still going to get solar power. So basically, my kind of rule of thumb for kids is that if you can see your hand in front of your face, then you're getting solar power. It's not until it goes dark that you don't have solar power. And no, you can't get solar power from a full moon. So everybody always asks me that. That doesn't work that way. Because, well, and I won't spoil this, because the next slide is going to ask you how they actually work. But the big things when you're looking at your house are, the cost and the amount of sun. Those are big things, right? I was going for more of the, is my house appropriate because does my roof face the correct direction? So if you live in a house and you've got your gable, and if your gable is running north-south, then your roof is facing east-west. And that's not the right orientation, right? You want your east-west gable so that your house has a south-facing side, because the south is where you're going to put your solar panels. And then, of course, you don't want to have trees in front of your house, because the more shade you have, the less solar energy you're going to get. So shade from a solar panel, shade from an obstacle is detrimental because it's permanent, as opposed to a cloud, which is transitional, right? So, and you can't really control clouds.
Residential areas would be good spots for solar panels then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of—
I would think so, yeah. Definitely. Okay, does the solar panel use heat to make electricity? I like the question marks. Maybe, yes, no, and maybe. Good answers. Okay, well, if it doesn't use heat, what do you think it uses? That's a loaded question.
Radiation?
Radiation, right. So basically, back maybe in your old physics classes, there was this wonderful phenomenon that light or the energy from the sun can come either in waves, heat waves, light waves, or little packets of energy. And those packets of energy are called photons. And so it's not actually heat waves or light waves. It's photons of energy that are interacting with your solar panel. It's not really heat. And on a January day when it's 50, not even 50, like 30 degrees out, but super duper sunny, I'm still getting a good amount of solar energy. So it doesn't have to do with heat, but it has to do with the photons. And they interact with the silicon that the solar panels are made up of. And then it moves electrons around, creating and inducing a current and making electricity. And it's way more detailed than this. But we created this really fun game called Solar Relay Game, where kids get to be pieces of a solar panel. They can either be silicon atoms or photons, and they play a cute little game of tag to kind of see that there's motion inside of your solar panel. That's kind of fun. Okay, last question, I promise. What time of the year do solar panels generate the most power? March 20th at 2:30 in the afternoon.
I would guess it depends on the hemisphere you're in.
That is a good point. Okay. So let's assume, let's assume we're in the northern hemisphere. Okay, yeah, so summer, right? So during summer, we are going to get the most sun. The day is the longest. The sun is the strongest. So that is the day that we would get the most solar energy. What time of the day do you get the most solar energy? Noon, right? And then that's like, we call it solar noon. So I'm holding this up. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is my solar panels. You can see the sun finally came out today. But I had, early in the day, we didn't have a lot of solar power. And now during this time of the day, we've got our spike. So it's pretty cool to see. And then, I mean, I've only had it for a couple months, but you can see this month has been kind of a crazy month with my solar panels. We've had some sunny days, but we've had some cloudy days. But it really is, when we get to the point where we're looking at months, you know, these are our yuckiest months when it comes to solar power. As we get closer and closer to summer, my bar chart is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, assuming that we don't have a lot of clouds. So, So there you go. And it's important to understand when you generate the most solar power, especially if you have them on your house, because the question is, when do you use the most power? Do you know when you use the most power during the year?
During winter?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, unless you're on like a oil or a gas heat, most of us use heat in the wintertime. And if it's electrical heat, that takes a lot more power. AC in the summer, yes, you'll see another spike, but it's a lot lower spike because it doesn't take as much power to run your AC as it does to run your heater. And so if you think of the power profile for solar panels, we actually get the most energy in the summer when you're not using as much electricity, and you get the least in the winter when you're using the most electricity. So it's kind of off. That's why it's important for net metering or to have a battery backup if you're off grid. And then if you paired it with a wind turbine, you actually see the wind turbines have a similar profile to your peak load. So in the winter, we usually see higher winds than we do in the summer when you're not using as much electricity. I'll be out in a little bit, I promise. Okay. Can you pause it for me? Okay. Sorry. Okay, well then we'll rewind it later. Okay, so that's it for my solar trivia. Do you guys have any more questions about solar or wind turbines?
I did a report on clear solar panels last year. It's just like a little one-page paper about this research people were doing on creating a clear solar panel that could be implemented like a window or something. And I was wondering if you'd heard about that and if you think it's actually viable to be used.
Oh, that's great. I have heard about the idea of having like a film or some sort of clear solar panel that you could use as a window. It is definitely in early stages, but otherwise I don't know much about them. I worry with a lot of the newer technology, like the flexible, you can like roll out a solar film or solar, onto like a metal roof, or the solar tiles or these things. I worry about efficiency. So the efficiency of solar panels is getting better. But when I say getting better, it went from like 15 to like 20. So efficiency of solar panels is still relatively low. And then when you have these high technology, thin films and flexible things, I think that the efficiencies go down and then the cost goes up. So just something but as the market grows and, just like anything else, the cost will come down. But it would be really cool if we had that, because I would totally put them in my house. Definitely a cool idea.
Team B, do you guys have any questions for Remy? Team B is actually working on a solar powered phone charger. So I wonder if they have any questions.
Cool.
I guess I hadn't thought of any specific questions, but like, have you heard of like how, because we got the idea from after browsing online, like, and we saw a few like small solar charger kits, so we thought of making our own. And have you like, I don't know if you think that would be like a realistic, we're thinking of placing a solar charger like around campus that you could use for your phone or something. And we like,
that's very cool.
Realistic.
Yeah, no, totally realistic. So I have one that I bought off of Amazon that's like, it's foldable, and then you open it up, and I guess it's meant to sit on your dashboard of your car or something. It's got a USB slot, and you can just charge your phone out of it. DC panels are a nice pairing with DC chargers, like your phone chargers and your laptop chargers and things like that, because they're also using DC power. So you don't need a power inverter, and you don't need a da-da-da. So it makes the project a lot easier. So I mean, I think it's a perfect project. It's a really nice combination. My brother did something similar. He's like a techie whatever DIY guy, and he built a little solar panel that he can just bring out on the porch with him, where he's sitting on his back porch and it charges his cell phone. So totally doable. And I think that college kids would dig something like that, like little birds, but cell phone chargers that you run out with your cell phone. Pretty cool.
Great. Remy, since you are using that, I wonder if you ran into any problems with the current design, because they're not trying to reinvent the wheels, but trying to make it better. So if you already noticed something that they could modify to make it better.
Yeah, I mean, the one that we have, it does charge really slowly. That's the biggest issue. And I don't know, I'm not an engineer, so I wouldn't know how to fix that. But if you've got the know-how, I mean, and then I wonder if integrating a battery into it so that you could leave the solar panel out in the sun, and then you like bring it to class with you, and you can like sit there and charge it in class with the battery that's inside of it, instead of having to sit outside and charge your phone or something. It's just a thought.
Great. And also I have a question that I said previously that I would like to hear how you usually do these hands-on activities with kids or with participants.
Yeah, so we have because we have our lending library, and so if you go to our website and you hit borrow a kit, it'll show you somewhere on the order of 30 to 50 different kits that you can borrow as an educator. And they're hands-on kits where you can do various things like make solar powered houses, build a wind turbine, build an offshore floating wind turbine platform, do an energy audit on your classroom. So they really do range. But the idea is to get these hands-on kits in a bin and with the necessary paperwork and lesson plans. That's super easy to just hand off to a teacher and they can implement it in their classroom. So for your Girl Scout event, I mean, we did an instant kid win challenge. Was it last year? Maybe it was 2 years ago, at K-Tech in Charlottesville. And we basically, gave them everything they needed to build a wind turbine and gave them like 6 hours to do it. So that was super fun. But yeah, I mean, if you have anything that you want to do related to energy or renewable energy, I'm happy to help you find a kit. And if you can't find a kit, maybe we could build a kit or brainstorm. But I love this kind of stuff. So anything I can do to help. Do you have an idea about how expensive a single solar panel would be? And would one solar panel be effective? So for your project, this is, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, but realistically you need to know what you want to power, and then you want to find the solar panel that matches what you want to do. But the reality is that I think you can buy like a relatively modest size solar panel at like Tractor Supply or Batteries Plus these days. I mean, obviously you can order them on Amazon. I would think you would want something that's, in terms of size, not too much bigger than like a laptop, I would assume. And at that, you might be looking at, I don't know, 75 watts. Would it be difficult to make your own solar panel? Yeah. So you need to get silicon, which is a semiconductor, and then you have to slice it super duper thin. And then you got to do all this chemical coatings and things like that to get your N layer and your P layer. And then you sandwich it all together, and then you got to connect it with Y. So it is complicated. You can buy kits online where they'll give you like your own little silicon wafers, and then you can build your own solar panel. But I've never done one. I think it would be cool to do. I encourage you to try it. And then let me know how it goes. Take pictures. Any other questions?
I put it here. Remy, I wonder if you have any recommended online resources or websites or things where Team B can look for more information.
Yeah, so I just put my email in the chat. So please, oh, I think I did that privately. Sorry, I meant to send that to everyone. Oh, I can't today. Sorry, guys. So you can email me anytime. But there is on our KidWin challenge, we host a wind challenge and a solar challenge. And in the rule book, there are some resources for solar on like how to build a solar panel. So let me see if I can remember. I think that's our website for the KidWin challenge. And if you download the rule book or the guide, the rule book or the guidelines or whatever, there should be some, or it might be in the coach section where we've got educational resources. But if you can't find it, let me know and I can find it for you and send you a link. And then the I really can't type today. I think that's the website for our kit library, where you can look through the kinds of kits that you could borrow from us. It's also got lots of worksheets and lesson plans in there. So if you're looking for a fun activity to do with kids, you feel free to browse that. Need.org has a ton of free curricular materials on energy, wind energy, solar energy, you name it, it's in there. So if you're looking for activities to do with the Girl Scouts or what have you, that's another great place. And then of course, kidwin.org is another place that's got lots of curricular materials, and you can buy cool kits and stuff. Yeah, so those are kind of the big ones.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Really thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, please, if you ever have a question or want to run an idea by me, you know, I'm happy to review your emails and give you a call, whatever you want.
Wonderful. Do you guys still have any other questions for Remy? Okay, then thanks so much for your time, Remy, to give us a talk and talk about your own journeys as a STEM professional, and also sharing knowledge about wind and solar. We definitely learn a lot from you today, and we will make sure if we want to do something with kids, and we'll contact you for more information and your suggestions.
Sounds good. Well, I look forward to it.